Huge welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Obviously very topical information at the moment with some of the big changes coming to the Residential Tenancies Act. There's 130 odd changes. So for the layman out there just trying to be an investor, trying to navigate through that is huge. So this is my great pleasure to introduce you to Hayley Mitchell. So Hayley is an expert in this field. She's a real estate trainer focusing predominantly on Residential Tenancies Act and real estate and rental side of things. Coaches all over the world, trains all over Australia, runs her own business. She's actually a practicing property manager as well, which I think is really important that people understand that she sees it from both sides of things. So thank you so much for joining us, Hayley. We do want to say there's an option for questions and answers. So you've got a little tab to ask some questions, so you can type those in. Hayley will try and cover off some of those at the end of the session. So you can just put them in now and then she'll go through and answer. Then some of those questions might get answered through the session. So without further ado, hand it over to you, Hayley. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'd love to get your insights onto these 130 changes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sure you're going to really enjoy it too. It's a heap of information that I put forward today, so I talk really fast. I will have the presentation available to everyone after the session as well. So I'll email that through to Brett and Christy, and they're happy to share them on with anyone that wants a copy as well. So no issues there. All right, we'll get going. So obviously with the COVID situation that's happening at the moment, we're not going to be covering off on that. We are talking about the 130 changes which are coming to the Residential Tenancies Act. They were actually due to come in on the 1st of July 2020, but because of COVID, they have been postponed slightly. So basically the Residential Tenancies Act is the main source of consumer protection for Victorians. So it outlines the obligations of landlords and property managers. And this was introduced in 1997. I actually joined real estate in 1998 or 9. I can never remember that one. And when I joined real estate, that was when the Residential Tenancies Act was created. When you look at laws that are more than 20 years old, the way that we manage properties now is completely different than what we did 20 years ago. So there's no, I guess in my opinion, that needed to be updated. I personally, and this is my personal opinion, I feel it has gone a little bit in the tenant's favour or the renter's favour more than the landlords. And it doesn't mean that we can't still effectively manage properties. We absolutely can, but we need to be a lot more careful about what we do and when we do it. So there are a few of the reforms which are currently in place. The majority will come into effect on or before the 1st of January 2021. This will give the rental sector time to prepare, and it is a sweeping reform package. So it actually will cover rooming houses, caravan parks, residential housing, social housing as well. So there's a massive amount of people that it does affect. So the new terms, a tenant will be called a renter, a landlord, a rental provider, a lease, a rental agreement. I'm still getting my head around all of them. Landlord, rental provider, residential rental provider is the other wording for it. An agent stays as agent, so at least we stay the same. Penalty units. So penalty units are fines which can be imposed if you do the wrong thing under residential tenancies. And one penalty unit's equivalent to $165.22. It increases by 2.5% each financial year. And one of the biggest changes in Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill is the significant increase in the penalty units which can be imposed. And in a couple of the slides, I've given you examples of what they are, just so you can see. And the aim is to create greater compliance with the new legislation. So if I sell tobacco to a minor, I own a milk bar, I sell tobacco to a minor, it's a 4 penalty unit fine. If you, for instance, relet a property before you're allowed to, it could be a 150 penalty unit fine. So significant fines associated with doing the wrong thing, and I'll explain that a bit further on. So some of the changes that are already in place. So Dr. Heather Holst was appointed on the 10th of September 2018. She's the Commissioner for Residential Tenancies, and she looks at and listens to the first-hand experience of renters, advocacy groups and key stakeholders. She'll identify community issues and advocates for opportunities for change to government. She also provides independent advice to the Victorian Government to recommend changes to rental laws, programs and services to improve the renters' rights, practices and tenant experiences across Victoria. So her job is to pull all of this together. As of the 1st of Feb 2019, long-term leases are allowed. This allows security of tenure. It also allows tenants and landlords to tailor the terms of a rental agreement of more than 5 years to agree upfront to things like rent increases and minor changes. If you are considering a 5-year fixed term lease, please think carefully about your circumstances. Imagine in 12 months' time, you have something happen and you need to sell your property. If you want to put that property on the market, you would have to do so with another 4 years still left on that lease. And it will really cut down on the amount of investors or people that will want to look through the property. So my recommendation is, where possible, stay to a short-term lease of less than 5 years. It could be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, just so you've got that added flexibility rather than tie someone in for a long period of time. From 19th of June 2019, we can give our little red book, which is a guide to tenants, in electronic form. So as long as we adhere to electronic communications, we can communicate with the tenant electronically. And as of the 19th of June, landlords can only increase the rent every 12 months. So previously, you were allowed to do this every 6 months. So now every 12. So pets are in now. So I'm going to go through this one in detail because this is one that has been, I guess, owners are very upset about. Now, pets are allowed as of the 2nd of March 2020. So if a renter wants to keep a pet, they have to complete a pet request form, which is a form approved by the Director of Consumer Affairs Victoria. They have to do this for each animal they want to keep. They want 3 chickens, they do 3 forms. A pet means any animal other than an assistance dog, within the meaning of Equal Opportunity Act. You then, once the renter gives you the pet request form, you have 14 days to either sign off on it and give them permission, apply to VCAT to say no, or ignore it. Now, if you ignore it and you don't respond within 14 days, the tenant has an automatic right to keep a pet. You can only refuse a pet if you go to VCAT and VCAT gives you an order to say the pet can be refused. If you get an order refusing the pet, you will get that order that excludes the pet from the rental property. So when making its decision, VCAT will decide the type of pet, the type of property, the appliances, fixtures and fittings, other relevant laws, i.e. is it allowed under local council, and anything else that VCAT considers is relevant. If VCAT does make an order excluding that pet from the premises, the renter has 14 days to comply with the order before it takes effect. If a renter has not complied with the order, then the rental provider can serve them with a notice to vacate, giving them 28 days to vacate the premises. So just with pets, just be aware, there have actually been 2 cases that have gone to VCAT. Both cases have failed. And the reason was the properties were suitable for the pets. So one of them, the owner said they had allergies and planned to move back into the property at a later period in time, and their insurance did not cover the pet, and it was thrown out. Basically, because the property was suitable for the pet was allowed to stay. So just be aware it's going to be very difficult to say no to a pet. Now, say you have an Alaskan Malamute in a 1-bedroom flat and it's got no courtyard. Yes, that is reasonable to say no to a pet. But if you have someone that wants to keep a cat in a 1-bedroom flat, very hard to actually say no. Application forms and discrimination. So a rental provider or agent cannot request inappropriate information on a rental application. We will no longer be able to ask questions about a tenant's nationality or if they've had any previous claims on their bond from another agent. Rental agreement forms will include an information statement that educates people about unlawful discrimination. And rental providers must not unlawfully discriminate or instruct your agent to do so against renters in situations such as refusing to rent your property to an applicant or issuing a notice to vacate or determining consent for disability required modifications. So we often have owners that say to us, I don't want someone of this nationality in my property. That is unlawful discrimination. You cannot instruct your agent to unlawfully discriminate. So when an application gets put forward to you, you can say yes or no. It is your choice whether you put them in, but just be careful about that discrimination aspect. Disclosure requirements before leasing a property. So before entering into a rental agreement, the owner must disclose to the renter whether the property is on the market for sale. Now, if you have a situation where halfway through a tenancy, you want to sell a property, but you didn't know that at the start, that is absolutely fine. It's just at the very beginning where you've already signed an authority to sell or organise a contract of sale with a solicitor, you would have to let the tenants know at the start of the tenancy. If there was about to be mortgagee action to repossess the property, if they're not the owner of a property but have a legal right to let it, i.e. Airbnb, any information about embedded electricity networks, other prescribed matters such as asbestos in the property, if a property is being used for the manufacture, storage or use of drugs, and I think that'll be in about a 5-year period. We're still waiting for more information, but that is what it currently says in the draft regulations. And also if there's been a homicide in the property within the last 5 years. And again, that's something in the draft regulations at the moment. When you advertise a property, you must make sure it is a fixed price. You can't do price plus advertising or a rental range. It's not like sales. We're not saying the property's $3 to $320 a week. We're saying the property's $320 a week. There's also a ban on inviting rental bids or soliciting offers of rent higher than the advertised amount. We can, however, accept a higher unprompted offer made by the potential renter. So if a renter comes up to us, I had one last week, rent's $650 a week. The tenant put in his application at $700. Now I rang him and I said, you've applied $50 more than what the rent is. And he goes, I love the property and I think it's worth it. I'd like to offer more. We accepted it. We're allowed to. I wasn't going to turn around and go, no, we're not going to accept that. We can absolutely accept it because I didn't solicit or invite him to pay more. An example of a potential penalty unit, if you break this section, it's a 60 penalty unit fine. So that's, 165.22 times 60, just under $10,000. You've got a duty in relation to the premises. So it is a landlord's duty on the day it's agreed the renter is to enter into occupation of a rented premises, that the premises are vacant and reasonably clean. This used to be 60 penalty units and it is going up, used to be 0, it's going up to 60. We need to make sure that we have enough wiggle room in between tenancies. So we often relet properties while a tenant is still in possession, a current tenant's still in possession. So if they're going to return the keys on Monday, we want to make sure that we've got a new tenant moving in at least the Friday or Saturday. So we've got enough time to A, make sure it's vacant, and B, reasonably clean. Just got to be careful. A residential rental agreement. So certain terms are going to be prohibited from being included in a rental agreement. There will also be a new prescribed form for a rental agreement, and additional clauses outside this form will not be allowed under the RTA. There'll be 2 different types of agreement. You have a short-term tenancy of up to 5 years. Now, generally, most owners would do 12 months as a normal term lease, or a long-term for more than 5 years. This is an interesting one. If a renter signs a rental agreement, but the owner has not, the rental agent has accepted rent or allowed part performance of the agreement, then the agreement's enforceable. So if you have a tenant that signs the lease and then you change your mind, the landlord changes their mind, if the tenant signed it and we've accepted it, it's a lease. Okay, so just be aware of that one. A term in a rental agreement can also only require professional cleaning if it's needed to return the property to condition it was in at the start of the tenancy, taking into account fair wear and tear. It's going to be a lot harder to get cleaning done in a rental property at the end of a tenancy, particularly around carpet cleaning. So there might be, we're going to wait to see how that one rolls out, but I believe it'll be harder. Keys, so rental providers must provide each renter with a free set of keys or security devices to renters to access and enjoy the premises. You can only charge a reasonable fee for additional or replacement keys or devices. All keys and devices do have to be returned at the end of the tenancy. And deadlocks will need to be fitted to every external door. A deadlock is a dead latch with at least one cylinder. So if you have a house that has just a timber door at the front and it's got just a normal handle lock, no deadlock, you will need to probably upgrade your locks. Just wait until it fully rolls out, this one. I don't want to go out and tell everyone to go and put deadlocks on everything and then all of a sudden they change this provision, but just keep in the back of your mind, you may need to upgrade your security at your premises. Rental payments. So any method for paying rent gets specified in our rental agreement. We have to give one reasonably available fee-free method of payment, and it should be something that's readily available, such as BPay. We have to disclose any costs that might be incurred by the nominated method prior to the renter entering the agreement. We have to accept Centrepay. So Centrepay is Centrelink. Centrepay payments are fantastic because it actually means that tenants who are on benefits will pay you the rent, or Centrepay pays you the rent before they pay the benefits to the tenant. So you're guaranteed to get the payments every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how they pay. We've got quite a few tenants on Centrepay in our area, and quite honestly, at the moment during COVID, they're kind of our best tenants because they're really not at any financial hardship. We can accept only 4 weeks rent in advance as well. And also for rent increases that occur during a fixed term rental agreement, the amount or calculation method for the increase must be set out in the agreement, and this amount calculation method must be used. So i.e. a 2-year lease term with an increase at the 12-month mark, you may say that it's a $10 increase after the first 12 months. An example of a potential penalty unit if you break this section is 60 penalty units, so 165.22 times 60. Late rents. This is one I don't love, okay? So I want to be really upfront about it. What I would say though, with late rents, is there are very, very few tenants that pay their rent late. Most tenants are very, very good with their rental payments, and even less tenants actually play the rent arrears game. But late rents, there is a new procedure for the late payments. If a rent is more than 14 days late with rent, on the 15th day we can do an issue a notice to vacate. When a renter pays back the overdue rent within that 14-day period, plus postage, and if we're Reggie Post, we add another 7 days onto that, any notice to vacate issued by the owner for the overdue rent is invalidated. This applies for the first 4 times it happens in a 12-month period. However, if a renter fails to pay the rent as required on the 5th occasion in the same 12-month period, the rental provider may give a notice to vacate and apply to VCAT for possession. If this happens though, VCAT can still potentially adjourn the possession application and put the tenant on a payment plan to meet any arrears. They also will have a right to send the tenant or adjourn the hearing and send a tenant away for financial counselling to see if they can adhere to a payment plan as well. A rental provider can apply to VCAT for compensation if a renter is more than 14 days late with rent on 2 previous occasions. Okay, so that will be our new process. It's going to be a lot longer period before we actually get to VCAT to actually get the tenants compliant. Bonds. We will only be able to take 4 weeks as bond unless the property is above the high value amount. We will expect this will be for rents over $900 a week. Currently, it's for rents of over $350 a week. We can no longer take higher bonds for the principal place of residence. This section has been repealed. Additional bonds will be allowed for long-term leases. That will mean that you can top up the bond for every 5-year fixed term period. And also for modifications, if there's a requirement that the tenant has to restore the premises at the end of the agreement. Pet bonds are illegal, even if a renter offers it, cannot accept it. A renter will have a right to apply for their bond back at the end of a tenancy. So at the moment, it's the agent that instigates that bond release. And we have to do so within 10 days of the tenancy ending, 10 business days. Under the new reforms, a tenant will be allowed to apply for their bond back. If we don't dispute that bond claim, the tenant will automatically get their money in 14 days. However, if we do dispute it, we do have to go to VCAT to dispute it within that 14-day period. Okay, so we've got to still finalise the bond, 14 days, 10 business days. Tenant can apply. If we don't dispute, the money goes back. If we do dispute, we have to do so within 14 days. If we don't, the bond goes back. Modifications. So there are going to be a list of prescribed modifications that a tenant can do without your consent. All other modifications require consent, and a rental provider can't unreasonably refuse consent to those. If a renter believes consent has been unreasonably refused, they can apply to VCAT to review the decision, and VCAT must hear it within 5 days. Now, I can tell you, hearings at the moment are not in person, they're over the phone. We've been trying to get a tenant out for endangerment and damage, and that's an immediate notice to vacate. We're 5 weeks in now and we still haven't had hearings. So at the moment, hearings are well longer than what they need to be. Hopefully in the future they get back on top of it, but to actually have a hearing in 5 days is huge. Like, that just does not happen. So the prescribed modifications will be outlined in the regulations. They're currently in draft form and they do include these items. So these are the things that a tenant can do without your consent. Property manager moves the tenant in. We go on to our routine inspection at the 3rd month, and this is what we could find. Installation of picture hooks or screws for wall mount shelves or brackets on walls other than brick walls. Installation of wall anchoring devices to secure items of furniture. Installation of LED light globes, replacement of halogen or fluorescent lamps, installation of blind or cord anchors, replacement of curtains if the originals are retained, and installation of adhesive child safety locks on drawers and doors. That's it. Now, I know when this first went through and there was the election campaign, and I remember Daniel Andrews saying, yeah, make your home and do this and do that. I thought tenants were going to be allowed to paint houses pink and put in new walls and do whatever they wanted. It's really quite basic stuff. Remembering too that everything, even prescribed modifications, have to be brought back to original condition subject to fair wear and tear. So at the end of the tenancy, the tenant does have to remove everything, patch and paint, unless you decide that they can stay there. As a condition of consent, you may require a modification be completed by a suitably qualified person. If your tenant wants to put in a split system air conditioner, you could say, yeah, you can, but you've got to use a licensed professional. You can also ask a tenant to pay an additional bond if it is over $500 to cover the cost of reversing the modification. So if your tenant wants to put in a split system, you might be able to say, well, you can put that in, but at the end of the tenancy, I require you to remove it, patch, paint, and bring it back to original condition. The cost of doing that will be $1,000, so you need to give me $1,000. I will lodge that with the RTVA as an additional bond, and at the end of the tenancy, if you don't remove that item, patch and paint the wall, I'll use that money to do so. We don't have that requirement in the Act for ourselves at the moment, so I'm actually quite happy with that one. There was a mistake in some of the information CAV put out regarding that, and I've chased them up and they've given me written confirmation about it now. So a lot of the things that they put through, some of them are not correct, and we're just trying to get them to fix up a few things, but we're getting there. It's a slow process. Before the end of a rental agreement, the renter has to reverse all the modifications or pay the owner the reasonable cost of reversing them, unless you agree otherwise. Maintaining properties. So there's a big responsibility for owners to maintain the property in good repair. Has to be in a suitable state to live in. Doesn't have to be perfect, but everything in the property has to be in working order. The requirements designed to prevent owners from not carrying out repairs when the property is an older property and the renter's on a low rent. So there was a case that went to VCAT, Shields versus Daliopolis. The property was a private landlord. It was in, I believe, awful condition. It had rats, it had mould, it had roof leaks, it had I don't think it was secure, didn't have working smoke alarms, pest infestations, you name it, it had it. The tenant took the owner to VCAT saying that they needed to maintain it. VCAT actually sided with the owner and said the tenant was on a cheap rent. She was aware of disrepair when she moved in and she stayed for 5 years. So they basically threw out the tenant's claim. The tenant then applied to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overturned the VCAT decision. So if you want to Google it, Shields versus Deliopolis, there's a heap of information online. And when a decision is taken to the Supreme Court, it then sets a precedence back in the VCAT Act that they can't ignore. So what that means is you can no longer say that that item's not working in the property. For example, you have an old gas heater that's decommissioned, you install a new split system, but you leave the old gas heater in place. You relet the property to new tenants. You put in the ad, agreement and condition report that the gas heater is not operational and won't be fixed. The new tenant issues the repair notice as soon as they move in. You must replace the gas heater. My suggestion, if it's not working, remove it. Easiest way to do it. You can no longer contract an item out as not working. And you can breach your agreement as well if you actually have an item that's not working. Minimum standards. Depending on your property, some of these things are going to be expensive. So I want you to start thinking of these as we go through it, remembering though that it is only in the draft regulations. We are waiting for the final proof to come out, but at the moment this is what it sits at. Locks, we have to have functioning deadlocks. We have to provide vermin-proof bins, council bins for rubbish and recycling. We have to have toilets in good working order. Pretty self-explanatory, that one. Bathroom facilities, they have to have a reasonable supply of hot and cold water. Kitchen facilities, sink, oven, stovetop and food preparation area. Laundry, if it has facilities, it has to have access to hot and cold water. So often you'll have an older style house and outside it's got like the under the veranda and it's got a cold tap for a washing machine. You will have to have hot water provided. So if you have one that only has cold, you will have to provide hot as well. Has to be structurally sound and weatherproof. Has to be free from mold and damp. It will have to comply with electrical safety. This is one of the big ones. This is going to be quite expensive for a lot of owners to actually upgrade their properties. They've given a whole lot of requirements with it. I'm not an electrician. I'm waiting till it's actually fully out there in the regulations. I will then give it to my electrician and say, this is what we have to make sure that we adhere to. And we're going to start planning to upgrade a lot of our properties because we have a whole lot of old properties on our rent roll. Window coverings on all bedrooms and living areas as well. Windows, all must open. So they've got to be able to be set in an open or closed position and have functioning latches to secure them. Now, it does not say that you have to have a lock with a key. However, if you have a lock with a key, you have to provide that key, okay? Lighting has to have access to natural, borrowed or artificial light and heating. So fixed heater in the main living area. A house will require a higher energy rating than apartments, and I'll go through that in a bit more detail now. So rental providers will be given a period of time to bring their properties up to standard. You only have to comply when a new tenancy agreement begins. So say minimum standards come in on the 1st of January 2021, and you have a 3-year lease that expires in 2023, then you won't have to adhere to the minimum standards till then. The minimum standards will be phased in, and the draft regulations currently state electrical safety from the 1st of July 2022, window coverings from the 1st of July 2021, heating for all properties from the 1st of July 2020. However, for houses, an energy efficient heater such as a split system, ducted or hydronic heater, slow combustion wood heater or gas space heater by 1st of July 2023. So for all properties, they have to have a basic level of heating by 1st of July 2020. However, or when the regulations come in, whenever that might be, 1st of January 2021, However, they will have to come up to a higher level standard by the 1st of July 2023. Renters will be able to terminate an agreement prior to taking possession if a property does not meet those minimum standards, or they can choose to take possession and request an urgent repair to fix that non-compliance. So if I rent a property that doesn't have a correct heater in it after a certain date, then it could potentially be that penalty unit of 60 penalty unit fine. Safety of property. So smoke alarms will need to be tested in accordance with the regulations every 12 months. Gas checks every 2 years. Electrical safety checks every 2 years. Pool fence safety checks every 4 years. Records will need to be kept for each check conducted at the property, and you must ensure the activity is carried out by a suitably qualified person. Now, I have had a few people that said our owners just simply won't do this. You must do it. It will become a legal requirement that these items are done 12 months, 2 years, 2 years, 4 years. Okay, so you don't have a choice. It is something that has to be done if you want to be a landlord moving forward. Condition reports. There's different requirements for condition reports at the start and end of a tenancy. They haven't quite been finalised yet, but some of the things state electronic copies of the condition reports will be allowed. That's fantastic. It means we don't have to print massive big documents anymore. Electronic's fine. A condition report has to be completed regardless of if you take a bond or not. Within 10 days of a tenancy ending, we have to complete the outgoing condition report in the presence of the other party, or at least give them a reasonable opportunity to attend. So we have to invite our tenants to our final inspection. Sorry, renters, I can't get it right. Within 30 days of a tenancy starting, if we disagree with what a tenant or renter has said on a condition report, either party can apply to tribunal to have VCAT to amend it. And if a renter reports defects or maintenance on a condition report, it is deemed to be reported and needs to be actioned within 14 days. Urgent repairs will include repairs or replacements relating to air conditioning. So that's a new one. Doesn't mean you have to put aircon in. However, if you have an aircon unit, it breaks, it's an urgent repair to fix. Safety-related devices and any fault or damage which makes the property unsafe or insecure, including a pest infestation or mould or damp caused by or related to the building structure. Consumer Affairs Victoria will issue guidelines clarifying timelines for responding to urgent repairs, and VCAT has to consider these guidelines when they determine any urgent repairs disputes. The money limit for renters to authorise urgent repairs when the rental provider has not promptly responded to an urgent repair request has been increased. We expect this to be increased from $1,800 to $2,500. So, for example, block toilet on a Saturday afternoon. They ring the agency doesn't respond. The tenant can then get a plumber out to unblock that toilet as an urgent repair, and they can spend up to $2,500. If a renter organises repairs to a property, a rental provider must pay them back the cost of urgent repairs within 7 days of a renter giving them written notice and the reasonable cost of repairs. Non-urgent repairs. This is a new change as well. We have to get quicker with the way we handle repairs in requests. So if a renter serves us with a 14-day notice of required repairs and we don't do it within 14 days, a tenant will have a right to apply straight to VCAT. At the moment, what happens is the tenant serves us with a notice of repair. We don't do so in 14 days. They have to get Consumer Affairs out to do a repairs inspection. Consumer Affairs then provides them with a report, and within 45 days of report, it's either 45 or 60 days of receiving the report, they can apply to VCAT. So this is going to make it a lot quicker. They report it, we don't action it, they can go straight to VCAT. Much quicker request. If a renter has caused damage to rented premises, they are required to reimburse the owner for the reasonable cost of repairs within 14 days after receiving a repair notice. They can, however, ask for an extension of time. If you don't agree with that, they will be able to apply to VCAT for an extension of time to pay back the reasonable cost of repairs. Entry to premises. We are able to enter premises upon agreement with the renter as long as the agreement is no longer than 7 days before entry. In all other cases, we have a right to enter by notice. So minimum 7 days notice for routine inspection, valuation and advertising photos and videos. Minimum 24 hours notice for landlord duty, tenant failed to comply and family violence. That hasn't changed. Minimum 48 hours notice for private or open for inspections for sales and rentals. No longer than 1 hour per inspection, up to twice a week unless otherwise agreed. And we have to give them that minimum of 48 hours notice. For renting, we can show in the last 21 days of the tenancy. So currently we can only show properties in the last 14 days of the tenancy. For sales, the renter is entitled to this prescribed compensation per sales inspection, currently set at half a day's rent per inspection with a minimum of $30 for the lower price properties. When putting the property on the market for sale, you also have to give that tenant a 14-day CAV notice, Consumer Affairs Victoria notice, prior to requiring access for the inspection. Now, you must pay the prescribed compensation for each sales inspection. Just be aware, it's not a choice, you must. Renters' requirements. So they have to keep and leave the premises in a reasonably clean condition. The renters and their visitors must not intentionally or negligently cause damage to the property or common areas. If damage occurs, they have to let us know. And a renter must report damage or the breakdown of facilities as soon as practicable after becoming aware to the rental provider. This report will be considered by VCAT if there's any claim for compensation by the tenant. And also, if a renter receives an end of fixed term notice to vacate in response to such a report, it's of no effect. So we've got to be careful when we do issue notices. So when we terminate a tenancy, one of the notices that we love is called 120-day no reason. And some of your property managers may have suggested before. So it's when you don't have a valid reason, legitimate reason under residential tenancies, you can pretty much say to a tenant who's on a periodic tenancy, I want you to move out, here's 4 months notice. That's going, okay? So we're no longer going to have access to that. So to end a fixed term agreement, owners can issue a notice to vacate at the end of the first term only, not on subsequent lease terms. So a notice to vacate for the end of fixed term agreement can specify a date on or after the end date specified in the fixed term agreement. We don't know how long after they're going to let us go. They've just said slightly after at this stage. So I would expect that there's going to be more agents and owners who are going to vacate their tenants more regularly. Because think about this, you have a perfect tenant. They've lived there for 12 months. You know, at the 9-month mark, your agent calls you and says, hey, they're great tenants, let's put them on another lease. You say, great. You put them on another lease. The second term lease, things start going wrong. You know, the rent's not paid on time, the routine inspections are not great. There's a whole lot of things that make you go, oh, don't really want to keep them here. You can no longer use that end of fixed term tenancy notice because you're in a second term lease. The only way you'll be able to evict your tenant in that case is a 60-day reason, and I'm about to go through those in a minute. The other thing is, when we want to issue a notice to vacate, we will have to give evidence for our notices to vacate. So for example, you want to move into your property, you call us up and say, I want to move in. We're going to say to you, go to the police station, grab me a stat deck saying that you want to move in, the date you want to move in, who's moving in. I have to issue that with my notice to vacate in order to have a valid notice. Okay, so I will have to issue evidence. The other thing with notices is if you serve a tenant with a notice to vacate, they will be able to serve you a 14-day notice of intention to vacate without paying any break lease fees. So if you've sold a property and you've made the settlement date and the end of lease date coincide pretty close, and you're serving your notice at least 2 months plus postage beforehand, your tenant can give you 14 days notice and leave. So you're going to have a period of time where the property's not tenanted. Also, when they need special or personal care, they need temporary crisis accommodation, or they've been accepted into social housing, or if they've been given a notice to intention to sell but were not informed of that prior to signing the lease agreement. That's only if it happened right at the start of the tenancy. Death of sole renter. So with death of sole renter, they still need to give 28 days notice at the moment. They're changing that. So there's no set time. It will be upon agreement. VCAT can also terminate a notice to vacate in that instance. I would say that if a tenant passes away, you just work with them as much as possible, the next of kin, to try and get it all sorted as quickly as possible, because it's a really quite a difficult experience for everyone. So these are our notice periods. Immediate notice to vacate for endangering the safety of neighbours, owner, contract, agent, contractor or employee. Serious damage to the property, including safety equipment. And they do put an example of safety equipment being a smoke alarm. There'll be a 14-day notice to vacate for threats and intimidation. So this is where a tenant has seriously threatened or intimidated the owner, agent, contractor or employee, or a legal purpose. 28-day notice to vacate, pet kept without consent. That's where you've already gone to VCAT, you've got the order to remove the pet's still there. And if a renter would like to vacate the premises, so just their normal vacate. 60-day notice to vacate, a bank or other mortgagee provider wants vacant possession. End of fixed term tenancy of less than 6 months, obviously the first term agreement only. Or repairs and renovations, demolition, premises to be used for business, premises to be occupied by rental provider or family, sale required for public purpose. And a 90-day end of fixed term for more 90-day notice to vacate, and end of fixed term tenancy of more than 12 or more than 6 months actually, so your normal 12-month agreement, and it's the first term only. A lot of owners go, I know what I'll do. I'll just say I'm going to move into the property, but then I won't really move in, and then I'll just relet the property. No one will ever know. If they do find out, there's a potential of 150 penalty unit fines, so nearly $25,000. So basically, if you serve a notice of vacate to the tenant saying you're going to move in, you can't let that property for 6 months from when the date the notice to vacate was given, okay? You can apply to VCAT to have the property cleared to be relet earlier. So just be aware of that. But they're really clamping down on these notices to vacate. Oh, Jeremy, I promise you it's not all negative. There is some good stuff as well. I'm the landlord. I own quite a few investment properties. I'm actually not worried. I actually think it'll be fine. I think we've just got to be smarter about the way we do things. And as long as you're using an agent that's on top of all this, you'll be absolutely fine. Lease breaks and assignment fees. So if a rental agreement's been assigned to a new renter, the rental provider can only charge fees that are reasonably incurred by them because of the assignment of the agreement. So this is where you have, 2 tenants living in a property. One tenant decides to move out and another tenant wants to move in. There's actually a heap of work that we have to do as agents. So we charge a fee to a tenant. In the future, we're only going to be allowed to charge a fee to a tenant if that fee is put in the landlord's authority. So we've updated all of our authorities. We charge $200 plus GST to a tenant. So we've popped that into our landlord's authority. Doesn't mean that you as a landlord will be paying for it. It just means that that's the only way we can get it reimbursed. Rental providers can apply to VCAT for compensation if a renter terminates a fixed term rental agreement before the end date. The amount payable will be determined based on the loss incurred by the rental provider and any financial hardship suffered by the renter. When making a compensation order in the case of a lease break, VCAT must consider the severe hardship the renter may have suffered due to an unforeseen change in circumstance. So the allowable fees for break lease: pro rata letting fee. If you pay 2 weeks rent to lease the property and the tenant stays half the term, the tenant would reimburse you 1 week's rent. Advertising, based on what you pay to advertise the property, and rent until the property is relet or until the end of the lease. Utilities. So a rental provider is liable for the cost of supplying water, gas or electricity to the rented premises for as long as the rental provider is in breach of their duty to replace a water, gas or electrical appliance with a replacement which has equal or greater prescribed energy efficiency rating. So we have to adhere to energy efficiency ratings, and if we don't, then the owner would be liable, obviously, for the cost. Rental providers must pay for all charges that renters are not liable for, including water charges in respect that are not separately metered. So if you have a property and it's in a block of flats and there is no separate water meter, then the owner pays for the charges. The tenant will only pay for the water usage if there's a separate water meter. Where a renter has received an excessive utility bill to a hidden fault, such as a leak in water pipe, the renter provider must pay the costs that exceed the renter's ordinary usage amounts. That's been in for a while as well. With that, you must make sure that you try and just get it provisioned back from the Water Authority anyway. So we had that when we moved out of a property years ago. When we moved, it's like a $5,000 water bill, and we're like, I don't think so. And it was a hidden fault, so that's fine. The Water Authority just prorated our account back. No one paid anything, so it was fine. Whole lot of stuff coming in family violence as well. So VCAT can decide on terminations of rental agreements in family and personal violence situations. So VCAT can terminate an agreement or require creation of a new agreement that does not include the alleged perpetrator. An application brought to VCAT for the termination of existing rental agreement or the creation of a new agreement must be heard within 3 days. So when terminating and or creating a new agreement because of family or personal violence, VCAT may apportion liability between the victim, perpetrator and any other co-renters in relation to the bond and any outstanding unpaid rent, utility charges or damage potentially. When considering application for a payment of a bond, VCAT will be able to determine that a renter who is a victim of family or personal violence is not liable for any loss or damage caused by the actions of the alleged perpetrator, who is not a renter. A rental provider, landlord or database operator is prohibited from listing information about a person on a database. So we use databases called NTD or Ticker. Not all agencies use them. Some use one and not the other. Some use both, some don't use any. But we're not allowed to put a tenant on a database if they're a victim of family violence, and they can apply to VCAT to have that removed if we have. Notice to leave for serious violence been updated to include further practical information for a suspended resident. And if a renter's agreement has been suspended because of an act of serious violence, the suspended renter can arrange with the rental provider to have an authorised representative get their goods. So I'll give you an example. If you have a husband and wife, and I'm just going to generalise here. I know it doesn't always work this way, but I'm just going to use this as an example. The husband's the perpetrator, the wife's the victim. The husband signs the lease. We know the wife lives there, but she's never been on the written agreement. If there's a situation where it has a family violence situation and he's removed from the tenancy, VCAT can then create a tenancy for the wife, even though she wasn't originally on the first lease. So they can say, right, we need to give the wife a new tenancy with the same terms and conditions as the original agreement. And we then enter into an agreement with the wife, even though she wasn't the original on the lease. There's a whole lot of stuff. It's a massive section. That's a very small summary. I would just suggest if something like this happens, we read up on it at the point in time. I've been in real estate 21 years and I've never had to deal with it. So it's not a common occurrence. Goods left behind. So rental providers must give renters a CAV notice of goods left behind and store the items in a safe place for at least 14 days. The former renter or other person who owns the goods may reclaim the goods at any time before they're sold or disposed of. Before the goods, and this is actually a good thing, so before the goods can be reclaimed, the owner may require that an occupation fee be paid. An occupation fee may only be charged if the goods left behind were sufficient quantity to prevent you from leasing out the property, and it's equivalent to the daily rent. Okay, so for an example of that, at the moment, if we do a warrant of possession and we lock a tenant out of the property, rent stops the day we get possession, whereas in this example, we're going to be able to continue to charge rent in accordance with the lease for another 14 days while their goods are there. So number one, it'll speed tenants up from getting their stuff out because they're actually paying. Number two, it's just a lot clearer process. So we won't be getting Consumer Affairs Victoria out anymore to doing goods left behind inspections. We as agents will do those. And yeah, it's going to hopefully be a lot speedier process. We can obviously immediately throw out goods of no monetary value, perishable foodstuffs, dangerous goods. You do have to store all of their personal information, so computers, USBs, phones, report cards, mail with their name on it, any personal information for at least 90 days. If they're willing to pay a reasonable cost to get those goods back, you have to return those goods to them as well. So this is something I'm not particularly happy about. This has come in already with the COVID legislation as well. Every time we go to VCAT and we want to get possession of a property, it has to pass the reasonable and proportionate test. So is it reasonable and proportionate? The way what the tenant's done, would it be reasonable and proportionate to put the tenant out on the street, basically? So VCAT must not make a possession order if it considers the failure to comply with an order trivial, or that it has been remedied as far as possible, or the breach of duty was not a repeat breach. VCAT also has to consider depreciation when assessing a renter's claim for rent provider's claim for compensation for damage. For example, carpet has an 8-year lifespan. Once it reaches this age, there is no compensation payable for damage to the item. So you might have lived in your property for 10 years and the property is absolutely perfect and it looks like, you know, immaculate. And then the carpet's 10 years old. Tenant moves in, trashes the carpet, then you can't charge the tenant anything for that because it's already gone past its effective lifespan. You will be able to join owners corporations to any matters. So if you have properties that are part of an owners corporation and there's a defect or a fault originating from the common area that damages your property, then you will be able to charge the tenant, you'll be able to have the owners corporation joined as an application. There's a rent special account. So if a tenant serves notice of urgent repairs on a property, and sorry, I've got a delivery, it's a bit loud. So if the rent special account, so if you have a situation where a tenant reports maintenance to you, so urgent repairs, and your owner doesn't carry out those urgent repairs, the tenant can apply to VCAT to have a rent paid into rent special account, which means that they pay rent in accordance with their lease, but the rent doesn't go to the owner. The owner then has to prove that they would suffer severe hardship if the tenant was going to pay rent into the rent special account. If you can't prove that, then the rent will be paid into that account. As soon as it meets the cost of repair, VCAT can then order for the repairs to be completed and a tenant will have a right to apply for compensation from the rent they have paid into rent special account as well. There are CAV guidelines and fact sheets. Now, I'm actually happy about this. We have lived in a world of grey in residential tenants for the last 20 years. Under the new legislation, we're going to have set guidelines and fact sheets, which VCAT must take into account, and these will be set by the Director of Consumer Affairs Victoria. So when we're going for a dispute about maintenance, cleanliness or repairs, fair wear and tear and damage, we will have those guidelines and fact sheets to work with. There's going to be a non-compliance register as well. So if you or we commit a breach under the Act, so such as non-maintenance, let's go with that again. So say a tenant serves us with a notice of repair, the repairs are not conducted or completed to the property, the tenant takes it to VCAT and VCAT breaches the owner because they have a duty to maintain the premises. The owner's name, rental property address will go onto the non-compliance register, which is a publicly listed register that anyone can look at. You'll be on there for a 3-year period. Agents also will go on the register with their name, company name and address as well. As long as you maintain your property, you will never go on this register. In my 21 years, I've had one tenant take me to VCAT for an owner not doing maintenance. If you want further information about anything, I will send the PDF of the presentation through because I know I talk really fast and there's a heap of information. I will answer all your questions as well, I promise. But there's information here, so you can go to Consumer Affairs website. They've got a heap of information, 30 fact sheets and reference guides there. You can also subscribe to their newsletter and follow them on Facebook and download any of those reference sheets and guides that you want to have a look at as well. So what we have to do, we're going to have to be really stringent on our tenancy checks, and particularly with COVID, the way that's come about, you know, basically, for example, with rents, if a tenant is paying more than 30% of their income on rent, that is hardship now. So we've got to make sure that they can pay their rent. We've got to really look at carefully. Make sure you've got adequate landlord's protection insurance. You get that for about $300 with various suppliers. Make sure it covers things like pets, for example. You want to make sure that you've got good landlord protection insurance. You've obviously got building insurance as well, so you should have both. Make sure you maintain your property, include the safety related checks. You won't have a choice anyway. We're starting to do longer term leases at the moment of say 15 months, just to make sure we can still do our 2 routine inspections and decide whether we want to keep them or vacate the tenancy at the end of a fixed term tenancy. We have to have practices that allow timely dealings with bonds, remembering to get a tenant will be able to apply for their bond back. I do think more tenants are going to be kicked out at the end of a first fixed term, which means a higher turnover of properties and more lettings. We need to look after our really good tenants though. That's what I'll say. Like our really good tenants are the ones that we want to keep. We have to be prepared to go to VCAT more often and have longer wait times for hearings. And we do have to just accept it. Unfortunately, it is changing. As a landlord, I'm personally not worried. I'm actually up for the challenge, and I think we'll be able to work with it quite easily. But it is what it is. So we just have to go with it. I will just answer some of these questions. So I'll just start in the chat area. Can the renter choose to limit the advertising? Say you normally pay for board internet and the renter only wants internet, or it goes with what the owner's paid in the authority. Belle, I agree. It goes with, I think it goes with what the landlord paid in their authority. And I also think it will be representative of what was done when that tenant moved in. So if you had a board when that tenant moved in, I believe you can probably do a board. But if you didn't, I think it'd be pretty hard to say, well, you have to have a board if they didn't have one when they moved in. Are there any changes in termination notice with COVID? Government announced the measures that landlord could not issue termination notice for 6 months. Yep, so we're not allowed to evict tenants for 6 months. We're not allowed to serve a notice to vacate for 6 months up until the end of September. We can, however, issue a termination application after we have gone to Consumer Affairs Victoria and lodged a request with them. They will then give us our reference number. We then have to put that into VCAT online and apply for a termination application. So we can still evict them, but there's no notice to vacate, so to speak. You can get a copy of the presentation. I'll email it through to everyone and they can share it. That's absolutely no problem. All right, let me just go to Q&A. So with the minimum standards, what if a tenant has contributed to failure of Section 8 mould and dampness? Okay, so the way mould and dampness is written, it is mould or dampness caused by or related to the building structure. So if you have a property that's got rising damp, falling damp, roof leaks that causes mould, obviously your responsibility. If it's something where the tenant's, not turning on the exhaust fan when they shower, or they're, heating up their bedroom so much and breathing all night and shutting the door and then not opening the blinds and ventilating during the day, then you've obviously got to be able to prove that. So what I would say in that case is you would need to get a mould specialist out to give you a report to say that the way the tenant is living is causing the damage to the property rather than a fault with the property itself. What about minimum standards applying to current renter but no new lease, just month to month? I believe it's until a new lease is signed. However, say your lease expires in February 2021 and the new legislation is in, as soon as a lease expires, it will kick into requiring those minimum standards. But when you're on month to month, I don't believe it will kick in until a new lease is signed. But I'm still waiting for 100% clarification on that because I think it's a bit of a loophole. Because I had a tenant that was periodic for 16 years. And he never wanted to sign a lease. So would that mean for 16 years I didn't have to adhere to it? Potentially. We'll just have to wait and see. Energy ratings. What I'll do is I'll just make myself a little note. I'll also send out the regulations, draft regulations, which I can share with you. The energy ratings are in those. So with the energy ratings, it's all different depending on what it is, but it's not set in concrete. So just don't freak out yet. It's like 2-star and 3-star. Gas and electrical safety check criteria. is that we will use licensed professionals that will go out and do the job for us. They haven't given us the criteria yet, so we're still waiting on exactly what they will be checking. Again, it's not something that's been rolled out yet. They've given us the broad overarching idea, but they haven't actually given any extra information there. With regards to safety checks, how does this work out for apartments, especially ones in large complex? So we'll look at your actual apartment. So your apartment has to be compliant. I'm assuming if there's a issue in the common area, or that the electrical components for the owners corporation are not where they need to be, then that would have to be upgraded as well. But this is stuff that when our electricians go out there and have a look, they will obviously let us know what needs to be done to be compliant. Deadlocks, does this apply to the door of the apartment or the building door facing the street? Still a little bit grey on that one. So I've got an apartment on the 3rd floor, and it does say if there's another security barrier preventing access, then potentially you would not need to put a deadlock on. So with mine apartment, I'm on the 3rd floor. You got a fob at the front that actually lets you in the property. So without a fob, you can't even get to the apartment door. Now, I only have a handle lock on my particular apartment, but I can't put a deadlock on that because it's a fire rated door. So you can only use certain locks as well. So that's why I'm saying with regards to deadlocks, they've given us the broad, they haven't drilled down into the intricacies of it yet. So just wait. If you have a door just facing the street, absolutely you'd have to put on a deadlock, but I'm just waiting for a bit more clarity around what happens if it's part of a security complex or you've got a security door preventing access, that sort of thing. If a tenant is on a month-to-month because lease has expired, do we still have 120-day? That's actually been removed due to COVID at the moment, so we can no longer serve 120-day notice. We don't know whether it's going to come back between September and January, or whether it won't be back at all. I personally don't believe 120-day no reason will be coming back. I think it's a gone notice at the moment. REIV thinks it'll come back in October and we might be able to serve it then, but I don't believe it will. That's just my opinion. If a property is sold and there's a periodic tenant in the property, can the new owner give a tenant notice? i.e. if a property is tenanted, can it be sold with the option of it being vacant? Yes. So if a property is sold and there's a periodic tenancy, you can give the tenant notice. So you can either sell the property with vacant possession, or you can sell it with the tenant in place and then sell it with the contract in place. So it depends what you want to do, and it is a 60-day notice to vacate. The new owner, it would have to be done by the existing owner because they're the ones that are currently on contract. So say you have a situation where in March the property is sold, it would be the existing owner that serves the notice, not the purchaser, because the purchaser is not yet in control of that property until after settlement. So hopefully that answers it. What if after a 12-month lease, the owner then lets the renter go month by month? That's absolutely fine. You can do that. There's no issue there. A lot of owners do decide to keep renters month by month rather than signing a new lease. We usually try and sign a lease because it just gives everyone a little bit more certainty. But yeah, you can absolutely let a tenant go month to month. Just means that if the tenant wants to leave, they can give 28 days notice to vacate.
See, the questions keep coming and coming there, Hayley. I see you. I think you might be here all day if we let you keep answering all these things. So we're very mindful of your time. And I think this sort of presentation actually gives so much information, but also invokes more questions. And
it does, yeah.
So we might cut it off there if you like.
That's all right. What we can do...
we've got those questions here. We can make sure that all those questions get answered. Yeah. We can send the information to all the people there so they can cover off on everything they have.
Yeah, no problem.
Otherwise, I think you're very kind with your time, but I think we'll have you there.
I can go all day when it comes to legislation. I love it. I find it really exciting.
Oh, look, you've got amazing skill at cutting through this really complicated information legislation and just bring it to more of a understanding so we really get it and bring it back to the real world. So
yeah, thank
you so much for what you've done there. It's absolutely brilliant. I think you've been you've compressed probably 6 months worth of legislation into a 60-minute presentation. So well done.
No problem.
And thank you for everyone for joining us. I hope it's been very informative. We will send a copy of this out with the slides to everyone who's registered, so don't worry, you'll get all the information there. And if you have any more specific questions, feel free to contact obviously your local Noel Jones office. We've got teams of experts that can help you get through all this. So thank you, everyone. And thanks again, Hayley. Absolutely brilliant. And we'll talk to you soon.
No worries. Thank you.
Cheers then.
Bye.